Good afternoon, and thank you very much for joining us on The Sages. And on The Sages, we speak to eminent Ghanaians and Africans. Okay? What we do is to speak to eminent Ghanaians and eminent Africans on their thoughts about different issues within Ghana and Africa. And today we are privileged to be joined by a professor of supply chain management. He is a professor at the Phoenix University, originally from Mali, and has some interesting perspectives about Africa and its development. My guest on The Sages today is Professor Abdoulaye Keita. Professor Keita, thank you very much for joining us on The Sages, and I believe you're doing very well. So for those who are encountering you for the first time, how would you describe who you are? How would you describe yourself to those who are encountering you for the first time through this program?
Yeah, thank you very much. And I'm truly honored to be given the opportunity to give my lifeline and thoughts to our continent and its people. It's a true honor, and I'm simply been very fortunate to have been raised in Africa and to come to the United States at an age when I was just simply starting to discover what the other world is about. And I'm really honored and happy that my life has gone well.
Mm. So let's talk a bit about your background. I mean, we've talked about the fact that originally you're from Mali. But how was it growing up? What do you remember about, your childhood and who you are even when you were in Africa?
Yeah. It's a very interesting path. My father was a medical doctor. He served in the French army during World War II. And after he was demobilized, he worked as a physician or medical doctor, pretty much in between the Sudan, which became Mali, and Upper Volta, which became Burkina Faso. He, like many intellectuals, and just in little parentheses here, when Mali became independent, we only had 13 college graduates in the whole country. Of them, most of them were medical doctors, and the other ones were veterinary doctors, and pretty much. And so anyway, he was assigned when I was around 3 to serve in Burkina Faso. And I was fortunate that he would take me on his occasional trips to the countryside, where he would go and visit with the local population and give them medical treatment. But then I knew he was taking some people along the way in government-furnished vehicle, which was like the medical equivalent of a medical vehicle. He would take them and drop them off along the way, and on our way back, he would pick them up. But I didn't really make much of it until much later, when I started to understand a little bit about independence and all of that. And it turned out that, he was actually working with the activists who he would drop off for their mobilization effort in the countryside. It was a risky thing he was doing, thinking back, because he could have lost his job. During colonial times, I don't think there would have been any sympathetic, and he would have been in jail probably. But anyway, that marked me. And then I was, based on our culture, my family custom, the eldest of my brothers, my father's brothers, there were 5 of them. The eldest would take the first child of each of his siblings. And that's
Okay.
how I became given to him. And he was in Chess, Senegal. He was running the what do you call, the printing shop for the railroad company, French railroad company. And, what I remember about those days, because I just had started elementary school, is the fierce, violent confrontation between the supporters of Senghor, who became president of Senegal, and Dr. Lamine Gueye, who was running a party that was affiliated with the French Socialist Party.
Okay. Okay.
So, those were really remarkable times. So,
Okay. Let me just take you back a little bit. I mean, we'll come to, the issue of politics and all of that because, at the
right.
time you were born, we'll look at, your childhood and your experience, learning more about Marxism and all of that. But you talked about how your father's brother, eldest brother, for instance, had to pick the first sons of all his younger brothers. Tell me how that culture, how that, shaped you.
Well, I actually became far more independent, having been raised outside of my, direct parents' protection. When you, live away from your parents, it's a completely different experience, and I think it served me extremely well. Having come to the United States, I've learned not to depend on anybody, and also it just kind of made me more of a fighter.
Okay.
I learned to really be more mature.
Great. So let's look at the Africa that we have today. You grew up here. You're now in the United States. How would you describe the African condition today?
It's a very, very bad situation from my perspective. I think that, we had a group of people who took us to independence, our, forefathers and our fathers. They have attempted at least to lay the groundwork for, really developing country. But as we know, there was this fierce confrontation between the East Bloc and the West Bloc. And we were pretty much dragged into that. So our societies became subject to the whims, especially of the Western powers. And they succeeded in using a lot of our leaders to have what I would call supervised independence. The economy that ensued, large youth out of school, poverty, water supply, infrastructure, all of those, developments have stopped. And to this day, almost like 60 years later, we're so far behind. It's unlike the East European countries that went independent in 1991, but then they already had, the society well organized, no indiscipline, everybody identified with authority, everybody followed the rule, and then everybody was educated, and this is where, yes, go ahead.
Yes. So what is it that we are not doing right? What is it that as Africans and as African leaders, we haven't done right that 60 years after independence, we haven't seen the kind of, promise that we had or the kind of things we promised people at the time of independence?
Yes. There's so many variables at play. But I would say the lack of vision, the lack of true desire to represent our people's interests goes to the heart of what we're really experiencing today. Unfortunately, our leadership, after our parents, our generation essentially ran pretty much all of African countries. And we were the ones with vast or large diplomas, doctorate, masters, you name it. I mean, we were produced from most big universities around the world. Russia, Czechoslovakia, China, France, Britain, Germany, you name it. We had people trained and they had the much broader experience and depth of things than our parents did. But our parents had much more social policies for the goods of the population. And we have completely departed from that. And we try to import, a system that just doesn't fit.
What is that system that we're importing that doesn't just fit? What's that system?
Yeah, we were told that, liberal economy was the solution. And I remember when I was in Mali before coming to the United States, the government was socialist leaning. They were actually far more to the left than a lot of the African governments under President Modibo Keita. And they, in 8 years, we had more than 30 factories, a distribution network around the country. From any point of the country, you would buy the same good at the same price, that sort of thing. It was sabotaged. And then, we're pretty much back to the, to the supervised independence with direct, hold of all of our major institutions by, particular French, servants or French technocrats. And we were completely divorced from, continuing developing our own systems so that, development really will take hold. I would say the biggest problem there is the fact that they made us stop developing, education, mass education. The day of independence, like I said, we only had 13 college graduates. But 8 years later, there had to be more than 1,500 because the government aggressively sent young people, to Russia, to Europe, and all of that for education. And many of them came to the United States, as a matter of fact. And then, but the effort was also to take the national language, the local languages, and they developed alphabets, and they started to teach them, and also had the adults, getting them to school so all of these efforts were stopped. So we just basically now have like 65% of our population over less than 35 years old. But I would say 75% of them cannot read or write. And that's a disaster ready to really implode.
Now, talking about, supervised independence, went back to the supervised independence. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, but what it means is, we have our independence, but it's in words, in deeds. You have Africans ruling these countries on behalf of extraterritorial powers. And those powers essentially tell them, how to run the country. we tied, especially in the French-speaking countries, within the French CFA franc, our major currencies, when we have our goods sold abroad and they brought back, the money goes to France, they decide how much we're gonna get in CFA, so they may have a plane load of CFA drop into our country. And it's a paper that even in France, they wouldn't accept as a currency for exchange of goods. So, they control all of the major segments of our economy. You take a lot of our countries, most of the, all the state enterprises were, closed, and they reopened pretty much some other operations under French, run by French, by French, to the extent that our passports, our electoral list, and all of those are controlled directly by France. And just to tell you, so they can decide if there's election, they can decide who they want to become president because they control the electoral list. And these are the sort of structures that we're living under.
Interesting. I mean, talking about, your childhood, you talked about how, your father at the time, part of the 13 persons who had been to college then, had to get involved in nation building and all of that. And at the time you indicated it was more of, many people belonging to the left at the time. Today it looks like, all of us, the whole world is moving towards the right. Now, what do you see as the state of the left in Africa, and what should be our priority going forward?
Yeah. Sad to say, but I would probably go back a little bit to, my early days in New York. We had an organization called African Youth Movement for Liberation and Unity, and it was, a small group of us, but then we were almost providing leadership to the, large African student organizations that were in New York. We were engaged in supporting national liberation struggles in the former Portuguese colonies, in South Africa, in Namibia. And then at the same time, we were educating ourselves, to support, to develop ourselves. So many of our colleagues went back home. They didn't go back home to become presidents, but I'm sure a lot of them have had chance to influence some other young people. But anyway, but then, go back a little bit to Mali. We had a lot of efforts in attempting to have, a Pan-African or to develop pretty much the left in Africa. You had the President Nkrumah, President Sekou Touré, and President Modibo Keita early on chartered the Union of African States. And then, unfortunately, in 1963, when the push for the OAU came about, they abandoned the process. I think that would have been the perfect nucleus for a unified Africa. The reason is this will go back to, even looking at Karl Marx and, he has this theory about, dialectic materialism, in which, having a leading force to achieve, change would be critical. And an American author, John Cutler, came up with the theory of change, but I think he probably read Marx, like many of them do. But he advocated that for change to become effective, you have to have a leading coalition. And to me, the Union of African States would have been the perfect coalition to move us to continue to move us to the left and build a united Africa, which to me is so essential for the progressives in Africa to control the agenda for what Africa should be.
What's wrong with what's wrong with our democracy today? What's wrong with, the economic system that we practice? What's wrong with, tilting towards the right?
Yeah, we got pretty much, like I said, the supervised independence made that our leaders, or those in power, who are really in many ways appointed by the West, they pretty much control the agenda. And if we do not, as long as we are into that, type of market structure, it will be really, really hard for us to control our economies. When they decide what our interest rates should be, when they decide, how much we can actually buy for any kind of project. If you want to do any major project in any African countries, you depend on France giving its blessing, or they can veto it. So this is the sort of thing we're in. Our economy is caused vast amount of unemployment, inadequacy of education. All those who are well trained, they don't have any outlets in society to hold jobs. Young kids as young as 6 years old, they can be dropped out of school because of this sort of very rigorous, exams that they have that become a roadblock. But above all, language. Our language, we cannot communicate unless we're only talking French among the French-speaking people, or we only speak English among the English-speaking people. We have no other ways to communicate. And what makes Asian countries so advanced? It's so simple. They don't spend too much time trying to figure out, what this word means in their thinking. It's in their language. So my younger sister was a school teacher, and she was one of the first to be trained to teach our local language to students. And she said they factually saw that children who learn science in their language, they become so much more proficient than those who basically come in and learn it from French. So just to tell you, the sort of structure that we created that's really causing us to be held back.
Now, this structure that you talk about, there's a school of thought that says, and we've heard that over 1,001 times, the world is a global village. And so you don't want to be left behind. So if you don't want to be left behind, we live in a capitalist market now. Many people tilt towards the right. China talks about scientific socialism. But in that case, you're Africa. What do you do? This is how the world is moving. You want to be left behind by resorting to your own systems, or you move with the world?
Well, I think what we don't have is what is called strategic planning. In the early days, we had strategic planning in Mali. Samir Amin, you may have heard of him. He's an eminent Egyptian thinker and economist. He was running the planning structure, the planning department in Mali for a few years under President Modibo Keita. And he's the one who designed the first and second 5-year plans for Mali, and a lot of the blueprint that he helped craft were followed and caused this rapid industrialization at the time. So, and then, schools, if you know population growth, then what you make sure is you adapt your plan to meet the needs that are coming in 5 or 10 years. And if you don't have any planning, and then you gobbled by massive number of children that are school year, but you don't have the classrooms to host them. You end up with classrooms of 200 kids in one classroom, and classrooms that are designed for 20 students. That's the sort of crisis we're in. It's a major challenge for us.
And talking about challenges, I mean, it's also important we look at the way forward. We'll talk about that more. But today you see African countries coming together, recognizing the need to engage in, intra-continental trade. And so you've heard about the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. Is that a game changer?
Well, we need to pursue it. But let me just tell you, and I'm sure we're going to get to that a little bit later, but the colonial years, they had each small country specialize in producing a specific set of goods, principally for export to France, for example. But then, it also helped kind of support the needs across the French, protectorate, they used to call it. So every one of these countries then was dependent. So Mali was producer of animal stock, and certain things like rice and millet. But Senegal was specialized in peanut production. So they will also make peanuts and peanut oil. And so the little commerce that existed based on the French people's system, they would basically go across the borders to support their hold over those areas in Africa. Within independence, we went away from that. So each small country started to try to become self-sufficient in everything that they need in terms of agriculture, for example. But then we stopped to, depending on the neighbor. And everything we made also was to maximize our production of goods, industrial goods that we can export to support, the lifestyle of the leadership, to which in many cases, really went into individuals' pockets. So, we have to really attempt to come together somehow and get some kind of planning and division of labor. But then that does not work, if we have punitive approaches, if there are some radical political changes in one of the countries. It has to be, that has to be out of the picture. If not, people will continue to want to, build their own little industries and exporting it to support their own budgets.
Will the AFTA be that game changer?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
I'm asking whether AFTA will be that game changer that we need.
Oh, yeah. Well, the game changer would certainly be, that if we truly adhere, but there's got to be some degree of incentive. So there's got to be, those countries, the OAU or the AU needs to really get people together and develop some incentives to further that. Because as long as we have this open world market, so to speak, people are going to go where they can, get the cash much quicker. And also because you're going to talk about currency situations. So when you want to sell to Ghana, you have to be willing to be paid in cedi, and the Ghanaians have to be ready to accept CFA franc until one day we all go to ECO, and then that issue will go away. So you're going to have a lot of agreements, to develop, among the countries to make that really, fruitful for us.
Okay, let's look at Pan-Africanism, for instance. Pan-Africanism, is it still relevant in today's world?
More than I would say more than necessary that we go in that direction. But we need to somehow have few people, few eminent thinkers and activists to work together to agree on a framework for that. First of all, I mean, there's got to be something that we all believe in, meaning that you need like a doctrine or some kind of ideology that guides that effort. How do we structure that? How do we, get to that? Will be, perhaps, your efforts there will lead to that somehow. But then when you have that, then that's in a book and is distributed across across Africa and the diaspora. And then the conversation will be channeled to, now how do we get to the actual deeds or actual operation of a Pan-African system? And Pan-Africanism, what do you see today? You have what they call the Kemite group, those who want to shake anti-jobs, thinking of Egypt in the center of African civilization, African gods and all of that. But then you have, the Kwame Nkrumah's conservatism kind of thinking, which is more like an evolution of scientific socialism or Marxism. So we have to find a way to get those people together and agree on a body of thoughts and theories and texts that will help us, to continue to advance. But Pan-Africanism, without it, I give you a very simple example. In the 70s in New York, Asians were like hiding themselves in the crowds because they were not seen as anything relevant. But tell me today that when you're Asian, they look at us, Africans, as inferior.
Yeah.
So because we basically continue to be everybody's, punching bag.
And that's something that we must change.
Absolutely. We have to change that.
My guest this afternoon is Professor Abdoulaye Keita, originally from Mali, based in the United States of America. We'll take a short break. When we return after the this break, we'll continue the conversation. We'll look at the suitability of this neoliberal democracy for us as a people. What must change? And we'll talk about some of the things that he saw. For instance, when he realized that Kwame Nkrumah had been overthrown, the overthrow of Modibo Keita and all of that, the murder of Patrice Lumumba. Stay with us. This is The Sages. We'll be right back. Right, so welcome back, and thank you very much for staying with us here on The Sages. And this afternoon, our guest is Professor Abdoulaye Keita, originally from Mali, based in the United States of America. He's a professor of supply chain management. So, Professor Keita, before we went for the break, we're talking about this conversation, a conversation about the suitability of the system of government that we even practice. What's your take on that? I mean, the kind of democracy that we practice.
Yeah. Well, democracy has been dictated to us, really, so to speak, starting in 1992. What we saw is laissez-faire. The people do anything, absolutely anything they want, and discipline became, the way of being a citizen. Corruption, open sky corruption. Nobody worried about it. They just took anything they want, anytime they want. Elections being commandeered from abroad. The minority of electors, electing our governments. Give you a simple example.
Please do.
In 2018, when the presidential elections occurred in Mali, Mali was then, I was part of a commission recently, for the North American Malians, a commission to make recommendations on what direction the Mali should take in educational reform. So this was an effort that originated in Mali, and everybody around the country were, creating commissions to discuss those, families from all levels of society, and everybody had to send their recommendations over to the central government for a final document. But anyway, it's impossible for our educational system to thrive without some key things. First of all, there's got to be some strategic planning. You got to know how many students will come in 5 years, so you have the right infrastructure to receive them, the right teachers trained to teach them. And next, you definitely have to have a very, very thought through curriculum, and especially favor science, but also favor the local languages. Ultimately, we have to find a way to have lingua franca. And the lingua franca takes away resources. At least it helps us save resources in having teachers. Like in Mali, there are 13 official languages. So then you're going to have a whole bunch of bureaucracy to make each one of those work within the educational system, which is really difficult. But so if there is a lingua franca, so to me, Swahili will be a perfect one. Yeah, I think we're going to get to that later.
Why? No, tell me, why would Swahili be the perfect one?
Well, Swahili is the majority, in terms of majority of the Africans actually speak Swahili, and there are a lot of derivatives to it that can easily be accommodated within one language. It's written, it's already taught in schools as the main language in many East African countries. So it's just a perfect candidate. It's ready to roll. And African languages are so similar that it will be not difficult at all for any African anywhere to learn Swahili, because it's not structured too different from what they speak anyway. So additionally, our schools should really close all of the specializations, literature-based specializations. I don't know about Ghana, but I know in Mali, the French system, when students finish the 9th grade, they go to high school. And in high school, they can go into literature only, language only, science, biology, and then technical engineering. That's how we do it. So for me, all of these literature and all of philosophy and language and all of that needs to be out of it. Everybody should just go common track, science, history, geography, political or ethics, and that should be really all we need.
Well, unfortunately, our time is up, but we need to have this conversation again. We definitely would come back to you, Professor Abdoulaye Keita. Thank you so much for making time to join us. We're very grateful to you. Do have a lovely day. And thank you,
sir.
Thank you very much for joining us here on The Sages on the JoyNews channel with me, Winston Amwa. Do have a lovely afternoon and enjoy your weekend.